I'm pleased to tell you that with the support of the Canal Corporation and the Power Authority and the National Erie Canalway Heritage Corridor, we have worked with the Canalway folks to create, using the science of this survey, we have created a new curriculum for New York State schools. And I think, Derek, you were involved in that, am I right? Yeah. So this is about to be unveiled and will be made available to all the schools throughout the state. Obviously, the schools in the corridor are going to have perhaps a greater interest. And lastly, I want to let you know that the sailing canal boats of Lake Champlain were not the only sailing canal boats in North America. It turns out, how many of you heard of the Mary and Hannah? The Mary and Hannah that was built in Hector, New York, on Seneca Lake. And in 1823, before the Erie Canal was even officially open, made a trip with farm products from Seneca Lake to New York City, where it was wined and dined and banqueted. They gave them a silver pitcher, all engraved, because it was such a big deal. So this boat came out, but we didn't know about others. And now we know, and we suspected that Seneca Lake may have produced more. But now we know from our study of sailing canal boats and finding one that Seneca Lake also created its own class of canal boats designed to sail on the lake, bring the rig down, and travel through the canal towed by horses and mules. And we know that because of the archaeological original we've just found and a captain's diary from 1853 that confirms it. So, now in conclusion, this venerable gentleman is a clergyman. I feel quite comfortable talking about him in this setting. This is the Reverend John Henry Hopkins, theologian, bishop of the Vermont Archdiocese of the Episcopal Church for 40 years, scholar, painter, and when he was a young man, he had a small church beyond Pittsburgh and had to go to New York City to explain to his bosses why he needed more money to finish the church. Sounds a little familiar. And he traveled on the Erie Canal the end of October and early November, which just so happens was the official opening of the canal. And when he went, he sketched it and painted it. And one of the things he painted was the elevated towpath at Montezuma. And it's an extraordinary artifact from the day, and I'm delighted to say that it was also our target number 7, and this wonderful image has been helping Len create a masterpiece that he's going to share with you tonight.
So this is where I left off. Martin Van Obel, Martin's journey, my commission. I was trying to figure out, I knew I was going to paint the area of Montezuma, and I knew I was going to be in the area of the Erie Canal and the crossing of the Seneca River, but I wasn't sure how to do it. So I had 2 working ideas. The first idea was partly based on what I learned from a couple of period maps that Craig Williams had provided me with. This is the Richmond Aqueduct, a detail from that beautiful 1862 map. This is blown up a detail from that map. And you can see this is the path of the improved canal. This is the aqueduct over here. But there's still a remnant here of Clinton's Ditch and that crossing of the towpath bridge here going back into the Erie Canal on the other side. This is a Google shot of that area. This is the town of Montezuma here. And this is the path of the canal as it makes its way and crosses the Seneca River. This is a great map. This is a map from 1825, or a little bit later than that. And this map has got some terrific details on it. And so I knew that I was going to be using this as one of the primary resources for this painting. I first focused on the lock itself. The Montezuma Lock. And the reason why I like this so much is because of this cluster of buildings, not only the lock, but the cluster of buildings that were documented on that map that were around it. So I thought, well, I'll try this out, see if there's something here that I can work with. So I built a digital model, real simple digital model with just a few boxes representing those buildings. And then I rotated it to a position where I thought it would make it an interesting painting. So there's the lock and the buildings. Here's the Seneca River in the background. And because this painting was going to be about this man's travels, and I knew I was going to be focusing on the passenger packet boat that was going to take him on his journey, I felt that this site wouldn't be a good way to represent that boat. I just couldn't make it work where it became sort of the focal point of the painting. So the second idea was to kind of move further down, take advantage of the fact that Hopkins had made this great record of what was there in the early days. I love these features, this little harbor. I love the barn. I like the bridge. The fact here we have the horses pulling a passenger packet across the Seneca River. I thought that spot, using those elements, and combining them with the archaeology that had been done by Art, with his finding of this beautiful passenger packet, which he calls Target 7, I was inspired by all this material. So I thought, okay, the second idea is going to focus on that packet boat, and I'm going to try to figure out what this boat would look like if you took all its parts and put it all back together. And I thought, I don't want to really do this alone because I don't have the confidence that what I'm going to come up with is going to be absolutely that close to what it might have been. So I have a very good friend, Mark Peckham, who happens to be here today. Mark is an experienced diver, a historian. He was the head of the Historic Sites Division at Parks and Recreation for New York for a while. And Mark had an idea of what the packet looked like. This is Mark's sketch of what he felt might have been there. And so we got together and I said, why don't we do this? I'll build a digital model of what I think it looked like. And Mark loves to make models, physical models. He likes to carve them out of wood. And Mark said, well, I'll make one out of wood, and then we'll get together and we'll compare our models. So this is the beginning of the digital model, the hull, and here are the two models together. There's my digital model, and there's Mark's wooden model. So we felt like we both came up with pretty much the same thing. And Mark's research helped me to kind of improve my idea of what Target 7 was. So from there, I knew that I had the boat, and I had an idea of what I was going to do in terms of siting it. So back to this map, you remember? I moved from this area where the buildings were down to the point where the towpath bridge was beginning. And I set myself up on this side of the towpath, sort of looking across when I made that scene. So again, here's the landscape, the perspective, the digital model sort of coming together. And then it was time to make the painting. And this is the scary part, because now I have an idea of what it is, I have a subject, and I have this plain, big, blank, white canvas. And that's when I want to go hide sometimes. I think I've already got this commission, this person has given me money, now they expect something to come out of this that's going to be worth it. So I started painting, and when I start paintings like this, the original of this is a print of it. The original painting is now in Nevada. The collector is in Nevada. But the painting, the original, was the same size as this print. But when it started, this is what it looked like. I don't know why I started with Martin there on the stern, but I was kind of I know what it was. I wanted my client to realize that I took it seriously, I was going to put their relative on the boat, and I thought that when I sent him these progress images, he would say, oh, thank God, there's Martin. So that's why it started that way. But the underpainting here, you can see a lot of orange, the sky sort of roughed in. This is a stage a little bit later. I added all these passengers up on the roof, kind of up on deck, kind of taking in the nice day, the nice weather, and the scene. Now here I've started to overpaint the terrain. I have most of this done. I have pretty much all the background done. But up here you'll see that there are two horses that are going to be towing this passenger packet across the canal. And at this point, I spoke to Art about it. I sent him my progress photographs, and Art said, you know something? Those packets were drawn by 3 horses, not 2 horses. So I thought, okay, there's one element that definitely has to change. So, and that's based on what you can see in the Hopkins watercolor. So in the end, one of the most difficult parts of this painting to paint was all this shrubbery in here. But in the end, it evolved, and this is a finished painting with the 3 horses. And that's how this project concluded itself. And there's Martin on the back, kind of waving. And you probably can't read it in the slide, but I named this vessel Septimus, which is Latin for 7, since it was Target 7 that Art found on the bottom of Seneca Lake. So there's the finished piece, and that's the end of my program. So, Art, why don't you come up and we'll try to answer some questions if anybody has any.
Just, this is being recorded, so please speak up if you do have a question. We'll try to get it on the recording here. Also, we forgot to mention, Dan forgot to mention, I forgot to mention that this is literally the route of the original canal. I mean, we are standing, and this boat is floating on the route of the original. I'm not making that up. This is it right here. This church was built on top of Clinton's Ditch. So it's always, God Henry Hopkins was floating, walking,
right through the
floating, right through here.
And as a religious man,
yeah, that guy
would have been quite compatible.
That guy is probably waving from right here. He's probably standing here with his hat.
So, and also, we took Len out yesterday to show him in Montezuma where this site, you can go visit where that painting is. Some of the posts from the bridge are still there. Cheryl Longear and Stan Longear and the whole group out there in Montezuma has made a wonderful park, 188-acre park. You can visit that. You can visit the aqueduct where you saw Brian standing. So make yourself available on that. Go see, compare Henry Hopkins' painting to Art's painting, and it's a magical place to go. So ask your questions, ask them loud, and ask plenty, please.
Yeah.
The packet boats that you found in Central Lake, packet boats are known to be sailing vessels. So what's a packet boat doing out in the middle of Central
That's a great question, the question is, why would a packet boat be out in the middle of the lake when typically we imagine them as being rooted on the canal, and that was our puzzle. We have a high school intern working with the project who I turned loose into the newspapers and said, find me an answer for this, or an explanation anyway. And sure enough, he did. There's an 1835 ad for the packet boat line out of, I think, Geneva, which really talks about going Geneva to Montezuma. That was the trip. And then back again, you know, and there were multiple boats, because by then it was so successful. I mean, these people were this was a growth business. But it was very clearly where you went was from Geneva to Montezuma, or Montezuma to Geneva on the canal. These were not on the lake vessels. But 3 years later, in an 1838 ad for a different business name, but working in the same area, you could go from Montezuma to Geneva, but you could go from Geneva to Crooked Lake, which means you were coming out and entering Crooked Lake, so there, all of a sudden, you're breaching the canal location. And then there's a one-liner that says, and it stops at all the principal ports on Seneca Lake. And so at one time, these things were successful enough, and there was apparently, or at least a perceived, viable business opportunity, that they extended their range of motion. And I presume this one was one of those, and this was a weak link. It didn't make it. We will undoubtedly, I expect we will find an account and a circumstance, which is what the intern is looking for right now as we speak, but we have not found it yet. But thank you for the question.
Are all boats in deep water, or there's some in shallow water that you could raise?
Up until last year's survey, where we found the largest number of boats, almost all of them were in deep water that we had found. We're primarily surveying in deeper water. But on any body of water like that, I would expect to find them from 0 to 600. That's just the way those things work. And there is going to be a band of shipwrecks, I say 30 feet or deeper is what we've surveyed with the multi-beam. That band of 30 feet and shallower will undoubtedly produce a whole class of shipwreck sites, many of which will be abandoned sites. You know, they were abandoned after their working life. They got taken out and sunk where they won't, you know, hurt any other boat traffic. But that is yet to be seen. But last year we did find a number of targets in what I would call 100 feet or less, which is what we consider diveable water.
What were the years of the railroad in Syracuse?
Oh, with that painting of the train coming down the street in Syracuse? That's the 1930s. But there were trains already traveling there way before that. There were 100 years of trains going down the street in Syracuse. Yeah.
And you said there was 100 trains
100 a day.
That's
yeah.
amazing.
Yeah, it was shortly after that time period in the 30s when they rerouted the New York Central so that it didn't go down the middle of the street.
Remember dealing with Dick Wright on that deal? That painting?
Really?
Do you remember dealing with Dick Wright?
Oh, yes, yeah, I do.
Yeah, Richard Palmer here has been one of the great historian contributors, not just to our project, but to projects all around the state that have to do with canals, canal boats, and railroads, and cobblestone houses, if I remember correctly. Yeah, so he's one of the great resources, and we're very lucky to have a community of people like Mark Peckham and Craig Williams and Mike Riley and Dan and others who we exchange information freely and all the time. We're kind of all in this together. It's really terrific. and it makes for a much better result for you guys. And we hope to be able to really bring a lot of this out and present it as part of the bicentennial program that is yet to be unfolded.
The two men that helped me the most with quite a few of my railroad paintings, in particular the Schoharie Valley Railroad, that short milk run train, was Dave Gould, who has passed away, and Len Killian, who's still around, but he's up there, he's in his 90s. And both of those guys were terrific because when I started that project, I wasn't sure what to do with that locomotive. Now, if you know railroading, you know that Schoharie Valley Railroad locomotive is a mishmash. It got built as a wood burner, they got changed into a coal locomotive, they took pieces off, they put pieces on. And I love the fact that it looked like a mutt. And I thought, I really want to do this one, but I don't know enough about it to be able to kind of really get it realistic. So working with those two guys, I started to do the digital model, and once a week, they would come out and look at the model and give me a critique. They'd say, you got the wrong gauge here, this should be bigger, this part should be over here, this should be wood, the boiler wouldn't have looked like that. So gradually I got it to a point where those two guys said, that's pretty good. That looks like the locomotive. So it gives me a lot of confidence when I get to work with people like Art and other historians, because I start off not knowing a heck of a lot about some of the subjects that I've worked on. Now, in this painting here, some of you may come up and look at the details in here. There's a sign in this painting, a little painted wooden sign that points to Montezuma. I spelled it wrong. I can paint, but I can't spell very good. And so my wife is a great speller, and she said, that's not how you spell Montezuma. And I thought, I'm going to leave it like that, because I'm going to assume that the guy that painted the sign can't spell either.
It's historically correct.
And I know you had another question or a comment.
Painting on Batavia.
Yes, engine 999. Yeah, that was fun to work on. That's an unusual locomotive. And when Art was talking about how the railroads came along and started to replace especially the canal passenger business, and you were talking about on these boats, on these passenger packets, they were going an amazing 5 miles an hour, right?
Yeah.
So you were getting there faster than you could walk, and
Yeah.
you didn't have to walk.
Yeah.
But when those steam engines started coming along, and when the railroads came along, now you were going 30 miles an hour, 40 miles an hour. And in 1893, the Pennsylvania Railroad and the New York Central Railroad had this kind of ongoing competition. And one of the things, every time the Pennsylvania did something, the New York Central decided they were going to do something better. And in 1893, they decided, we're going to build a locomotive just for speed. It's just going to go fast. We don't care if it can pull many cars or not, but it's going to be a fast engine. So they built it with these 8-foot driver wheels on the back, and they gave it a name. They wanted the name to be mysterious, so they called it Engine 999. And it came up from New York to Albany, and there was a lot of publicity, and then it made its way from Albany out to Buffalo. And when it got to that area by Batavia, there was a stretch of track there that was flat and straight, and they opened it up. This is May 1893. Engine 999 was recorded at 100 miles an hour. Wow. People didn't know if they could breathe at that 100, yeah. And it was disputed by the British because we didn't use British clocks. Oh, downhill. Yeah, a lot of downhill out there in the middle of the state.
There's another question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, over at the site at the park in Montezuma, I see they're developed an area, it looks like they're putting in a pad. Is that going to be for one of those mirrors or what?
Cheryl, you were talking about the pad yesterday at the beginning of the trail?
Chapman Road. The pad at Chapman Road. Or High Street, I'm sorry, High Street. High Street.
Yeah, what was
Yeah,
the, what's, he wanted to know what the pad is for.
Oh, okay, well, that's gonna be, a replica, not nearly as constructed as well as what Len did in his painting, but we do have a replica of one of the first packet boats on, the canal, the Montezuma. And, the Montezuma Historical Society had a mural painted by Don Jordan, that showed that site there where the original hotel was and where the Seneca, the Cuba Seneca and the Erie Canal joined. And so that's not having any buildings for this mural. One of our local businesses donated one of their containers. We put a mural on the container, and now the dock for the that to hold that mural is going to be put in that area right there.
Thank you. In the back? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, sir.
Okay, another question, another area. Along the Seneca Lake, where were most of these ships, was it the full length of the lake?
Full length of the lake. Full length of the lake.
Full length.
Watkins Glen has its own collection. Geneva End has its own collection, and then everywhere in between, with no particular logic other than we do see them as, you know, these were exposed places. The problem with Seneca Lake is there's very few places to hide. So if a steamboat left the north or south end with a tow, and all of a sudden the wind came up, and in some cases, they knew that the wind was going to come up, and the captains, there's at least one recorded case where the captain said to his supervisor, you know, there's no way I want to get out on the lake right now with these 10 canal boats. This is, you know, asking for trouble. And he said, you get out on that lake and start towing those boats, or I'll get somebody who will. And he did, and they had all kinds of problems. And so it really is just a question of, it's a bad dynamic for, or a good, you know, if you like high waves, very close together, on a boat that has very little forgiveness in freeboard, it's the perfect recipe for boats getting overwhelmed. The amount of stress and force, because remember they're also somewhat tied together. You know, they're on a tow, and the forces at play when they're moving side to side, it's very logical. Now that I look back, I mean, the theory was there should be some. Now looking back, it's very logical that there are a lot of boats based on the sheer numbers that made that crossing. They're not bad boats. You know, I'm guesstimating by the time we're done, we'll have identified and inventoried about 100 shipwrecks. But that's out of the tens of thousands that made the crossings over those years. So you can't blame the boats or the designers. They were designed for a function, and they did it very well. Yes, sir.
Speaking of Central Lake and more research is going to do, how long do you expect to be there, and then after that, what?
We hope to, I would say if all went well, we would hope to finish Seneca Lake at the end of next year. But we also have intentions of surveying Cayuga Lake and Keuka Lake, Crooked Lake, because those three lakes alone were the three lakes directly connected to the canal system. And so we set out to do an inventory of submerged canal boats in those lakes, and that's what we hope to be able to complete.
There's a couple canals run up from Boonville into the Adirondacks, which you can still see in
Yes.
Cyclaw.
Yes,
Is that Black River?
Black River Canal. And trust me, every place there's a big enough puddle to have a boat in it, there's a chance that there is. And a lot of times, if the canal was connected to a wetland and a boat was old or had developed problems that they felt weren't worthy of fixing it, they just drag it in. So there's, you can finding the boats is a matter of